After 30 years of marriage, my husband brought home a stunning 28-year-old woman and said, "Caroline, meet my daughter Jessica." I was overjoyed. After decades of infertility, I finally had a chance to be someone's mother. I opened my heart, my home, and my entire life to this young woman. But the daughter I desperately wanted to love was actually a mistress who planned to destroy me. Have you ever wanted something so badly that you ignored every red flag telling you it was too good to be true? Because what I discovered about my stepdaughter will make you question every relationship you've ever trusted. Subscribe, because this story has more twisted lies than a soap opera, and the revenge was so perfect it destroyed two lives at once. My name is Caroline Foster. 8 months ago, I thought the biggest tragedy in my life was that I'd never be a mother. I'm 55, married to Richard Foster for 30 years. Richard's 58, a successful developer I met when I was his secretary at 25. For 3 decades, I'd been fighting infertility. Treatments, procedures, hope, disappointment, it consumed our marriage. Richard always told me he had no children from previous relationships. I believed him. Then one Tuesday evening in March, everything changed. Richard was unusually quiet at dinner, checking his phone more than usual, nervous and distracted. After dinner, he said, "Caroline, we need to talk." My heart sank. That tone meant something serious. "I have a daughter," he said. I was sure I'd misheard. "You have what?" "A daughter. From my first marriage. Her name is Jessica. She's 28 years old." "Richard, this is impossible. You told me you and Linda never had children. You said she didn't want kids." His face darkened. "Linda was pregnant when she left me. She said the baby wasn't mine, that she'd been having an affair. She showed me medical papers saying I couldn't be the father. When she asked me to sign away parental rights, I did. I was devastated and couldn't think clearly. But now?" 6 months ago, Jessica contacted me through my company website. She'd done one of those DNA ancestry tests and discovered I might be her biological father. I agreed to a DNA test, Caroline. She's mine. She's my daughter. Linda lied about everything. She took my child and made me believe for 28 years that she belonged to someone else. My kitchen felt like it was spinning. "You've known for 6 months? And you're only telling me now?" I needed time to process this, think about what it means. I have a daughter, Caroline, an adult daughter who spent her whole life thinking her father abandoned her. She wants to meet me, to be part of my life, part of our life. Despite the shock, despite the pain of being kept in the dark, I felt something else growing in my chest. Hope. Where has she been all these years? Richard's face softened. "She's wonderful, Caroline. Beautiful, smart, successful. She works in marketing downtown. Linda raised her as a single mother, never telling her who her real father was." The poor girl. She must have felt so rejected, so confused. "That's why I want to introduce her to you. I want her to see she has a family now, that she's not alone anymore." Richard showed me Jessica's photo. The young woman looking back at me was absolutely stunning. Long black hair, bright blue eyes, and unmistakably Richard's smile. "She's beautiful," I whispered. She looks exactly like you. I knew. When I first saw her in person, it was like seeing a feminine version of myself at that age. When did you meet her in person? 3 weeks ago, we had lunch downtown. She was nervous. I was nervous. But Caroline, it was magical. I was already planning meals in my head, imagining finally having the mother-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of for decades. When can I meet her? I'd like to invite her for dinner this weekend. I want the two most important women in my life to meet. Let me pause here to give you some context about why this news hit me so hard. For 30 years, I'd been battling infertility, and it had shaped every day of my marriage. The first year of trying was exciting. Every month I'd count days, watch for signs, hoping this would be the month our dreams came true. When my period would start, I'd be disappointed, but optimistic about the next cycle. By the second year, excitement turned to anxiety. I started tracking everything: temperature, ovulation, the exact timing of our attempts. Our bedroom became less about love and more about conception schedules. Richard was patient at first. "We have time, Caroline. No need to rush." But I could see the strain in his eyes when another month passed without good news. I started blaming myself. Maybe I was too stressed, too focused, too desperate. By the third year, we saw our first fertility specialist. Dr. Martinez was kind but thorough. Blood tests, ultrasounds, procedures I'd never heard of. Richard had to be tested too, which irritated him. "There's nothing wrong with me," he said after giving his sample at the clinic. "I was married before, and Linda never had trouble getting pregnant. She just chose not to keep it." That was the first time I heard that Linda had been pregnant during their marriage. When I asked for details, Richard's face darkened. "She had an early miscarriage. It was part of what broke up our marriage. I don't like talking about it." I respected his pain and didn't push, but something about his explanation felt incomplete. By year 4, we were deep into fertility treatments. The hormones made me feel not like myself. The procedures were invasive and painful. The medications had side effects that made me question everything. "Maybe we should take a break," Richard suggested after a particularly difficult and unsuccessful IVF cycle. "This is consuming our entire lives." "Just a few more tries," I begged. "I know it'll work eventually." But I could see him pulling away. Romantic dinners stopped. Spontaneous trips disappeared. Our conversations revolved entirely around doctor visits and treatment schedules. The 5th year brought our most crushing failure. We managed to get pregnant through IVF. Barely, but the tests were positive. For 8 wonderful weeks, I mentally planned nurseries, imagined tiny clothes, told my mum she'd finally be a grandmother. Then I miscarried at 10 weeks. I'd never experienced grief like that. The loss of what was, combined with the loss of what could have been, left me unable to function for months. I took leave from work, barely left the house, cried at baby commercials. Richard tried to be supportive, but I could feel his frustration. "Caroline, we need to move forward. We can't let this define our marriage." "I just need more time," I kept saying. But time wasn't healing anything. Years 6, 7, and 8 blurred together. New treatments, new failures, new hope followed by crushing disappointment. We tried different doctors, different approaches, alternative treatments. I was willing to try anything. With each failure, Richard grew more distant. He started working longer hours, taking more business trips, finding reasons to be away from home during the hardest days. "I feel like I'm living with a ghost," he said during one of our rare, honest conversations. "Caroline, you're so focused on what we don't have that you can't see what we do have." "What do we have?" I asked. "A beautiful house with empty bedrooms, a successful career that means nothing because we have no one to leave a legacy to. Richard, I need to be a mother. It's who I am." "No," he said quietly, "it's who you want to be. But you're already someone, my wife, a successful woman, a person whose worth extends beyond your ability to reproduce." I knew he was trying to help, but his words felt dismissive. By year 10, when I turned 35, doctors started using terms like advanced maternal age and diminishing chances. Treatment became more aggressive, more expensive, more physically and emotionally taxing. "Maybe we should consider adoption," I suggested one evening over dinner. Richard looked up from his phone. He was checking emails during meals as usual. "Adoption? There are so many children who need homes. We could provide a wonderful life for a child who—" "I don't want to raise someone else's child," Richard interrupted. "If we can't have our own, maybe we're not meant to be parents." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Someone else's child. Richard, an adopted child, would be our child. You know what I mean. I want a child who's part of both of us, who carries on our bloodline. I don't want to spend my life wondering about some other man's genetics in a child I'm raising. That conversation ended our fertility journey and nearly ended our marriage. The next 5 years, I spent in therapy, trying to come to terms with the fact that motherhood would never be mine. I threw myself into other pursuits, volunteering at children's hospitals, supporting Richard's business, maintaining our social life. From the outside, our life looked perfect. Richard's real estate company was thriving. We had a beautiful home in the most prestigious neighborhood, traveled to exotic locations, hosted elegant dinner parties. People often commented on how lucky we were, how successful our marriage seemed. But at home, we lived like polite strangers. Richard had his office, his golf, his business trips. I had my volunteer work, my book club, my garden. We ate dinner together in comfortable silence, attended social events together, and maintained the appearance of a happy couple. The longing for children never completely went away, but I learned to manage it. I found outlets for my maternal energy elsewhere, mentoring young women at work, spoiling friends' children, supporting children's charities. It wasn't the same as having my own family, but it was something. By age 50, I'd convinced myself I was content. Our marriage had found a new balance. Richard had become more attentive to me after his midlife crisis passed, appreciating our comfortable life together more. We discussed retirement travel plans, moving to a smaller house since we wouldn't need the extra bedrooms. I thought I'd made peace with my childless fate. Then Jessica appeared, and everything changed. Saturday evening felt like the most important evening of my life. All day Friday and Saturday, I prepared for Jessica's first family dinner. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, arranged fresh flowers in every room, set the dining table with our wedding china and crystal glasses. Since I didn't know Jessica's food preferences, I decided to prepare a variety of dishes to suit any taste. I made herb roasted chicken with herbs from our garden, garlic mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and chocolate cake for dessert. If she didn't like something, she'd have plenty of other options. I changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a navy blue dress that was elegant but not too formal. I wanted to look put together but approachable, like a stepmother a young woman would be happy to have. All day I found myself wondering what Jessica would think of our house, our life, the room that could become hers if she ever wanted to stay overnight. I imagined holidays with a daughter at our table, shopping trips, heart-to-heart conversations, all the moments I thought I'd never experience. When the doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, I literally ran to answer it. Jessica was even more beautiful in person than in photos. She was petite, but perfectly proportioned, with flawless skin and that effortless elegance that made expensive clothes look casual. She wore a silk blouse, designer jeans, and shoes that probably cost more than most people spend on their entire wardrobe. But what struck me most was her smile. When she saw me, her face lit up with what seemed like genuine joy. Caroline, I'm so excited to finally meet you. Dad has told me so much about you. She stepped forward and hugged me without hesitation, which surprised and delighted me. The hug was real, warm, not formal or awkward. Welcome home, sweetheart, I said, meaning every word. I've been waiting for this moment since Richard told me about you. Richard appeared behind Jessica, carrying a bottle of wine. He looked proud and nervous. How are my 2 favorite ladies doing? He asked. We're going to be great friends, Jessica said, linking her arm through mine. I can tell already. During dinner, Jessica was everything I'd imagined she would be. She was articulate and engaging, asked thoughtful questions about my volunteer work at the hospital, praised my cooking enthusiastically, and shared stories from her marketing career that were both professional and personal. Caroline, this meal is absolutely incredible. You're an amazing cook. I've been living on takeout and frozen dinners for so long, I'd forgotten what real home cooking tastes like. Well, you'll have to come by more often then. I love having someone to cook for. I would love that so much. I've never had this. Family dinners, real home-cooked food, parents who wanted to spend time with me. My heart ached for this beautiful young woman who had missed so much. Tell me about your childhood, I gently requested. Richard mentioned your mother moved around a lot. Jessica's expression became more guarded, but she answered honestly. Linda was difficult. She had trouble staying in one place, trouble maintaining relationships. We probably moved 15 times before I turned 18. Different cities, different schools, different men coming and going from our lives. That must have been very hard for you. I learned to adapt. I learned to make friends quickly, adjust to new situations, not get too attached to people or places, because I knew we'd probably have to move again soon. What about school? College? I actually did well academically, despite all the upheaval. I got scholarships that helped me get through college. Linda couldn't help me financially, and I didn't know I had a father who could have supported me. I glanced at Richard, whose face showed pain. Jessica, I want you to know. If I'd known about you, I would have been there for everything. Your graduation, college, all the moments I missed. I would have supported you financially and emotionally. I know that now, Dad. I'm not angry about the past. I'm just grateful we found each other. And I'm grateful you found us, I added. Both of us. Jessica, I want you to know, you're not just Richard's daughter now. You're my daughter too. I've always wanted children, and I'm beyond happy that you're part of our family. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Really, you mean that? Of course I mean it. You're home now. She leaned across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you, Caroline. You have no idea how much this means to me. I was so nervous about meeting you. I didn't know how you'd feel about Richard suddenly having an adult daughter. Sweetheart, you're not an addition to our family. You're its completion, the piece we didn't even know we were missing. After that first magical dinner, Jessica became a regular presence in our home. She called us during the week to chat, stopped by for dinner 2 or 3 times a week, and often stayed late into the evening discussing everything from current events to family memories with Richard and me. I loved having her around. For the first time in 30 years, our house was alive with youthful energy. Jessica helped me in the kitchen, asked for recipe tips, and shared stories about her culinary disasters in various apartments. She curled up on the couch with us to watch movies, something Richard and I hadn't done in years. But gradually, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Jessica's relationship with Richard seemed unusually intimate, not inappropriate, but there was a physical closeness between them that struck me as too intense for a father and daughter who had just met. She would sit very close to him on the couch, often tucking her legs under herself and leaning her whole body against him. She touched his arm frequently when talking, laughed with her hand on his shoulder, hugged him goodbye just a bit longer than usual. When I mentioned this to Richard, he seemed defensive. Caroline, she's making up for lost time. She never had a father growing up, so of course now that we have found each other, she's affectionate. I understand that. It's just some of her touches seem more like girlfriend behavior than daughter behavior. Richard's face darkened. Caroline, that's disturbing. She's my daughter. She's affectionate because she's grateful to finally have a father in her life. I felt ashamed for even bringing it up, but something about their dynamic continued to bother me. Then there was Jessica's work situation. She'd presented herself as a freelance marketing consultant, but her schedule seemed unusually flexible. She could meet for lunch any weekday, stay for dinner on work nights, take spontaneous weekend trips without worrying about missing deadlines or client meetings. Don't you have regular clients who expect you to be available during business hours? I asked during one of our Wednesday afternoon shopping trips. I work mostly with international clients, Jessica explained. Because of time zone differences, I often have to work evenings and weekends, so I have flexibility during regular business hours. It sounded plausible, but I'd worked in business for decades, and something about her explanation felt rehearsed. Jessica's financial situation puzzled me. Her clothes, handbags, and jewelry were clearly expensive designer items. Her car was a brand new BMW. The apartment she showed me photos of was in an upscale downtown building. For a freelance consultant who grew up with an unstable mother and no financial support, She seemed to be doing remarkably well. You must have very lucrative clients, I commented one evening when she arrived in a designer dress that likely cost more than most people's monthly salary. I've been lucky, she said vaguely. A few big contracts that paid well. But when I asked about specific clients or marketing projects, her answers were always general and evasive. And then there were the phone calls. Jessica's phone was constantly buzzing with texts and calls. She would glance at the screen, then excuse herself to talk privately. Sorry, work call, she'd say, stepping onto the patio or going upstairs to the guest bedroom. But the calls seemed to happen at odd times for business conversations. Late evenings, early mornings, weekends. And they were frequent, sometimes 3 or 4 calls during a single dinner. One evening, when Jessica went upstairs to take another work call, Richard looked irritated. She works too much, he said. I've told her she needs to set boundaries with clients. It does seem like a lot of calls for freelance work. Maybe I should help her find something more stable, a position at a good company where she wouldn't have to constantly chase clients. But when Richard suggested this to Jessica, she was quick to decline. I love the freedom of freelancing, she said. I don't think I'm cut out for corporate life. The moment that changed everything happened completely by accident. It was a Thursday evening in June. Jessica had come for dinner as usual, but around 9 o'clock, she realized she'd left her phone in the car and asked to use mine to check an important message. Of course, sweetheart, I said, handing her my phone. Take your time. She stepped onto the patio to make her call, and I continued cleaning up in the kitchen. Richard had gone upstairs to shower. A few minutes later, I heard Jessica's voice through the open patio door. She was speaking quietly, but something in her tone made me pause from washing dishes. Baby, I can't talk long. I'm still at their house. No, she doesn't suspect anything. I know it's getting harder to keep this up. I moved closer to the door, telling myself I was just checking on the signal quality, but actually straining to hear more of the conversation. I told you she's completely clueless. She actually thinks we're some happy family. No, Richard's upstairs. We're safe for a few more minutes. My blood ran cold. She was talking about me like I was some obstacle or problem to be managed. I know money's getting tight, but we can't rush this. If she suspects anything now, the whole thing falls apart. Money situation? What? Money situation. Yes, I miss you too, but everything's going exactly like we planned. She's so desperate to be a mother. She believes everything. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding. Jessica returned a moment later with a bright smile and handed me my phone. Thanks, Caroline. Just needed to check with a client about a morning meeting. I managed to smile back, but my mind was reeling. Who was she talking to? What plan was she referring to? What money situation? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying Jessica's phone conversation in my head, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. She'd called someone baby, not exactly how you address a business client. She'd said I was completely clueless and didn't suspect anything. Suspect what? She'd mentioned money being tight and not being able to rush this. Rush what? But most disturbing, she'd said I was desperate to be a mother and would believe everything. Was I being manipulated somehow? But why? What could Jessica possibly gain by pretending to be Richard's daughter? Next to me, Richard slept peacefully, completely unaware of my growing anxiety. Should I wake him and tell him about the phone call I'd overheard? But what if I'd misunderstood? What if Jessica really had been talking to a client, and I was looking for sinister meaning in an innocent conversation? I decided to pay closer attention to Jessica's behavior, to look for other signs that something wasn't right. Over the next week, I became acutely aware of every interaction. I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked or made excuses for. When Jessica hugged Richard goodbye, her hands lingered on his chest a moment longer than they should have. When she laughed at his jokes, she pressed against him in a way that seemed more flirtatious than daughterly. When she complimented his appearance, "Dad, that shirt looks great on you," or "You're so handsome when you smile like that," there was something in her tone that made me uncomfortable. I also started paying attention to Richard's behavior around Jessica. He seemed more animated, more energetic when she was around. He dressed more carefully on days she was coming for dinner. He checked his appearance in mirrors more often when she was at the house. And there was the way they sometimes seemed to communicate without words. Glances across the dinner table that seemed loaded with meaning. A touch on the shoulder that made Richard's face light up. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. 2 weeks after overhearing that phone call, I made a discovery that shattered my world. Richard was out of town on a business trip, and Jessica had called to ask if I wanted to have a girls' lunch while he was away. "I thought it would be nice to have some alone time," she said. "Just the two of us." I was touched by the suggestion and offered to meet at a nice restaurant downtown. During lunch, Jessica seemed more relaxed than usual, more open about her life and feelings. "Caroline, I have to tell you something," she said over dessert. "Having you and Dad in my life has been incredible. I never thought I'd have a real family." "We feel the same way about you, sweetheart. I want you to know that I truly think of you as my mother now. Not just a stepmother, but a real mother. The mum I always dreamed of having." I felt tears welling up. "Jessica, that means everything to me." "I love you, Caroline. And I love Dad so much. You two have given me everything I didn't even know I was missing." After lunch, we walked back to the parking garage together. Jessica's car was parked a level below mine, so we said goodbye at the elevator. "Thanks for lunch, sweetheart. See you this weekend for dinner." "Can't wait," she said, giving me a tight hug. I got in my car and was fumbling with my keys when I realized I'd forgotten to give Jessica a book I'd brought for her. I grabbed it from the passenger seat and hurried back to the elevator, hoping to catch her before she left. When I rounded the corner toward her parking level, I saw Jessica standing by her BMW, but she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, and they were embracing, but this was clearly not a platonic embrace. His hands were buried in her hair, her body was pressed against his, and they were kissing with the passion of lovers, not friends. I ducked behind a concrete pillar, my heart pounding, watching in shock as Jessica and this stranger continued their intimate encounter. After a few minutes, they broke apart and began talking quietly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was unmistakably romantic. The man's hands stayed on Jessica's waist while she continued touching his face and chest as they spoke. Finally, they kissed again, and the man headed toward the building exit. Jessica got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing behind the pillar, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Who was this man? Why had Jessica never mentioned having a boyfriend? And why did their interaction seem so secretive and wrong? That evening, I called Richard at his hotel. "Hi, sweetheart. How's the business trip?" "Good, Caroline. Long meetings, boring dinners. How are things at home?" "I had lunch with Jessica today." "That's great. How is she?" I hesitated, not knowing how to tell him what I'd seen. "Richard, does Jessica ever mention her relationships to you? Does she have a boyfriend that you know of?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "She hasn't told me about anyone. Why do you ask?" "I just... She's a beautiful, successful young woman. It seems strange that she's completely single. Maybe she's focused on her career right now. Or maybe she's being cautious about introducing us to men until she's sure about them." Maybe. But Richard's answer felt evasive, and I hung up with more questions than answers. The next morning, I made a decision that changed everything. I couldn't stop thinking about the scene in the parking garage, about Jessica's secret phone conversation, about all the small inconsistencies in her story that I'd been ignoring. I decided to hire a private investigator. I'd never done anything like this before and felt guilty even considering it. Jessica had brought so much joy into my life, and the thought of spying on her disgusted me. But something was wrong, and I needed to know what. I found Patricia Chen through an internet search. She specialized in domestic investigations and had excellent reviews. Her office was downtown in a building designed for professionals, which eased some of my feeling that I was doing something sordid. Patricia was a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed, and importantly, competent. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes as I shared my concerns about Jessica. "Mrs. Foster, what exactly are you hoping to learn from this investigation?" "I want to know who Jessica really is. I want to know if she's really Richard's daughter, if her childhood story is true, if she actually works as a marketing consultant. And I want to know who that man in the parking garage was." "I'll need some basic information to start. Jessica's full name, address, phone number, if you have it." I provided everything I knew about Jessica, feeling like I was betraying her trust but unable to stop myself. "How long do you think this will take?" "For basic background verification and surveillance, probably about a week. I'll call you as soon as I have information." 5 days later, Patricia called with news that destroyed my world. "Mrs. Foster, I need to meet with you in person to discuss what I've discovered. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "Bad news?" "It's complicated news. We should discuss it in person." On the drive to Patricia's office, I tried to prepare myself for what she might tell me. Maybe Jessica had a criminal record? Maybe she was married and hadn't told us. Maybe she had debts or had lied about her education. I wasn't prepared for the truth. When I arrived, Patricia was waiting with a thick folder. She gestured for me to sit and poured me a glass of water before beginning. "Mrs. Foster, I'm afraid Jessica isn't who she claims to be." My hands started trembling. "What do you mean?" "First, the DNA test. I was able to obtain Jessica's real medical records through a contact at the lab. She's not Richard's daughter. The DNA test was falsified." The room started spinning. "That's impossible. Richard said, "The man in the parking garage. His name is Marcus Webb. He's Jessica's boyfriend of 3 years. But more importantly, he works at Gene Tech Labs, the same facility that processed Richard's DNA test." My world crumbled around me. He falsified the results? Not just falsified. Mrs. Foster, there never was a DNA test. Marcus created fake documents on official letterhead. Jessica and Marcus have been running this con for over a year. But why? What do they want from us? Patricia opened the folder and pulled out photographs, documents, financial records. Jessica's real name is Jessica Martinez. She's not 28. She's 33. She's not a marketing consultant. She's been arrested twice for identity theft and fraud. Marcus Webb is her partner in crime. Literally. They target wealthy older men, usually through dating apps or social situations. I stared at the photographs showing Jessica, my Jessica, with different hair colors, different names, different identities. But she knew so much about Richard's first marriage, about Linda. That information is all public record, Mrs. Foster. Divorce documents, property records, even old social media posts. They did their research thoroughly. And Richard? Does he know? Patricia's expression became even more grave. Mrs. Foster, Richard is not a victim in this. He's a co-conspirator. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. I followed Jessica for 3 days. She never went to any marketing meetings. Instead, she spent every day at Richard's office. Not as a visitor. She has her own desk there. She's been working for his real estate company for over 6 months. Working for him? Doing what? Helping him hide assets, Mrs. Foster. Your husband has been moving money offshore, transferring property titles, liquidating investments. Jessica's job is to help him disappear your joint assets before he divorces you. The room was spinning. I gripped the arms of my chair to keep from falling over. You're saying this whole thing, the daughter story, the family dinners, all of it, was just a way to get close to me. To what? Distract me while Richard stole our money? Exactly. And Mrs. Foster, there's more. Jessica and Richard aren't just business partners. They're lovers. I have photographs of them at hotels, restaurants, his office after hours. The father-daughter relationship is entirely fake. She slid a series of photographs across the desk. Richard and Jessica kissing passionately in his office. Richard and Jessica entering a hotel together. Richard and Jessica having intimate dinners at restaurants across town. I couldn't breathe. How long? Based on what I could verify, at least 8 months. Possibly longer. 8 months. The entire time I'd been bonding with my daughter, she'd been sleeping with my husband and helping him steal my life savings. Mrs. Foster, I need to tell you something else. Richard has already filed divorce papers. They're scheduled to be served to you next week. By then, most of your joint assets will be gone. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from Patricia's revelations. Richard's car was in the driveway. He'd returned from his business trip early. I found him in his office, supposedly reviewing contracts. When he looked up and saw my expression, his face went pale. Caroline, what's wrong? You look terrible. I know about Jessica. The blood drained from his face completely. What do you mean? I know she's not your daughter. I know about the fake DNA test. I know about Marcus Webb. I know she's been working in your office for 6 months. I know about the hotels, the restaurants, the offshore accounts. Richard stared at me for a long moment, then slowly closed the file he'd been pretending to read. How? I hired a private investigator. Caroline, I can explain. Explain what, Richard? Explain how you let me fall in love with a woman I thought was my daughter while she was actually your mistress. Explain how you sat at our dinner table watching me pour my heart out to her while you two were planning to steal everything I own. Richard stood up, his hands shaking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? Jessica was supposed to be temporary, just someone to help me with some business issues. But then I fell in love with her, Caroline. I haven't felt this way in years. So you decided to destroy our 30-year marriage by having me fall in love with her too? You were so happy. For the first time in decades, you were genuinely happy. I thought maybe if you had someone to care for, someone to be a mother to, you'd be fulfilled enough to accept a divorce amicably. I laughed bitterly. Accept a divorce amicably while you stole all our money? I earned that money, Caroline. I built the business. I made the investments. You've been living off my success for 30 years. I worked beside you for 30 years. I supported your business, entertained your clients, managed our household so you could focus on growing the company. That money is half mine legally, morally, and in every way that matters. Not anymore, it isn't. The coldness in his voice was like a slap. This was not the man I'd married, not the man I'd spent half my life with. Where is she now? Jessica. She's at her apartment. Call her. Tell her to come here. Now. Caroline, I don't think that's... Call her now, Richard, or I call the police and report you both for fraud. Jessica arrived 30 minutes later, and the moment she walked into our living room, I saw her differently. The warm, loving daughter I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. Caroline, what a surprise. I thought you were having a quiet evening at home. Sit down, Jessica. Or should I call you Jessica Martinez? Her mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of panic before she regained her composure. I don't know what you mean. I know about Marcus Webb. I know about the fake DNA test. I know you're Richard's mistress, not his daughter. I know you've been helping him steal our money. Jessica glanced at Richard, who was slumped in his chair looking defeated. You told her everything? She hired a private investigator. Jessica's demeanor changed completely. The sweet, loving daughter persona vanished, replaced by someone hard and vicious. Well, Caroline, since the game's up, let me tell you how much I've enjoyed this. Do you have any idea how pathetic you were? So desperate to be a mother that you believed every lie I told you. The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to stay calm. Why? Why not just steal the money and leave? Why make me fall in love with you? Because it was fun, Jessica said with a cruel smile. Richard told me all about your infertility, your desperate need for children. It was almost too easy. You practically threw yourself at me, begging to be my mother. And you, I turned to Richard. How could you watch me bond with her, knowing what you were planning? I told you, Caroline. I thought if you had someone to mother, you'd be happy enough to let me go without a fight. You thought you could manipulate me into giving up 30 years of marriage and half our assets by dangling a fake daughter in front of me. It almost worked, Jessica laughed. Another few weeks, and Richard would have had everything transferred. By the time you got the divorce papers, there would have been nothing left to fight over. I looked at these two people who had spent months systematically destroying my life, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Pure, cold rage. You're right, I said quietly. It almost worked. Almost? Richard looked confused. Did you really think I'd hire a private investigator and not take precautions? Did you think I'd discover your plan and not have a backup of my own? Patricia Chen wasn't just a private investigator, Richard. She was also a forensic accountant. While she was investigating Jessica, she was also tracking every asset transfer, every offshore account, every fraudulent transaction you've made in the past 8 months. Richard's face went white. What are you saying? I'm saying that every illegal money transfer, every forged document, every fraudulent account is now documented with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Jessica's fake identity, Marcus Webb's falsified lab results, your conspiracy to commit fraud. It's all been reported. You're bluffing, Jessica snarled. Am I? Check your phones. They both reached for their phones simultaneously. The blood drained from their faces as they read their messages. Federal agents raided Marcus's apartment 2 hours ago, I said calmly. They found the fake DNA documents, the false lab reports, evidence of Jessica's previous identity theft convictions. They've also frozen all the offshore accounts you thought you'd hidden so cleverly. Caroline, wait. Richard stood up, panic in his voice. We can work this out. I'll transfer everything back. We can forget this whole thing happened. No, Richard. We can't forget 30 years of marriage ended by a fake daughter who was actually your whore. Jessica lunged at me, but I was ready. The pepper spray Patricia had given me caught her full in the face, and she collapsed to the floor, screaming and clawing at her eyes. You see, Richard, I learned something about myself these past few months. I don't need to be a mother to be complete, but I do need justice. The sound of sirens filled the air as police cars pulled into our driveway. I've spent 30 years being the supportive wife, the understanding woman, the person who sacrificed everything for other people's happiness. That woman is gone. As federal agents entered our house to arrest Richard and Jessica, I stood in the doorway of the life I was leaving behind. You wanted a divorce, Richard. Congratulations. You'll have plenty of time to plan it from prison. And Jessica, I hope those expensive clothes were worth it, because orange jumpsuits are going to be your new wardrobe for the next 10 years. 6 months later, I'm living in a beautiful apartment downtown, funded by the recovery of our stolen assets, plus the life insurance money from Richard's policy, which, fortunately for me, doesn't pay out to convicted felons. Jessica got 8 years for fraud and identity theft. Marcus got 6. Richard got 12 years for financial fraud and conspiracy. I never became a mother, but I learned something more valuable. I became a woman who doesn't let anyone destroy her twice. And to my subscribers watching this, if someone seems too good to be true, trust your instincts. If your husband suddenly discovers a convenient daughter after 30 years, ask questions. And if you ever find yourself being played for a fool, Remember, revenge is a dish best served with federal investigators and a good forensic accountant. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, silence may leave the deepest scars, but sometimes the loudest justice comes from the quietest revenge.